Bar Rules Series. Remedies.
At law, damages. Torts. Compensatory damages aim to put plaintiff in the position he would have been in had the injury not occurred. Special damages are those that are unique to the plaintiff, including medical bills and lost wages. Punitive damages are reserved for extreme and outrageous conduct in order to deter future misconduct. Nominal damages are symbolic damages, often $1, which validate a plaintiff's rights, and are awarded when no actual or substantial harm is proven. Contracts. Expectation damages. Expectation damages aim to put plaintiff in the position he would have been in had the contract not been breached. Expectation damages measure the benefit of the bargain. For the sale of property, this is typically measured by the difference between the fair market or cover price and the contract price. For services not rendered, this is typically measured by the cost of substitute performance. Special damages are those that are unique to the plaintiff, including incidental expenses caused by the breach and lost profits. Reliance damages. Reliance damages are those costs spent in preparation for performance or in anticipation of the other party's performance, and they are not added to the damages. However, reliance damages are alternative measure of damages when expectation damages cannot be established. Punitive damages are generally not available for contract damages. Liquidated damages. As an alternative to calculating expectation damages, the parties may stipulate the measure of damages in the event of breach. Such measure must be a reasonable approximation of the anticipated loss and not punitive. Limitations to damages. Contracts. All damages are subject to limitations due to certainty, causation, foreseeability, and mitigation. Causation. Contracts causation requires that the breach actually caused the loss. Certainty. Certainty requires that the losses be measured with reasonable certainty and not too speculative. Lost business profits can be reasonably estimated from past performance, but are likely not recoverable for a new business with no track record. Foreseeability. In tort, foreseeability mirrors the proximate causation analysis and requires that the harm be a reasonably foreseeable consequence of the defendant's conduct. In contract, the rule of Hadley requires that the loss was within the contemplation of the parties at the time of contracting. Avoidable consequences. A plaintiff is required to take reasonable steps to mitigate damages, such as obtaining cover or substitute performance. Valuation problems. Cost of repair versus diminution in value. Courts generally award the cost of repair, as this restores the plaintiff to the status quo ante, unless the repair cost is disproportionate or results in economic waste. In such cases, majority jurisdictions limit recovery to the fair market value of the property, while minority jurisdictions use the diminution in value as the cap. However, where the cost of repair exceeds the property's value, some courts still allow recovery if the plaintiff has a personal reason for the repair and will not receive a windfall. TRO. A TRO is an emergency order that preserves the status quo for up to 15 days, until a preliminary injunction hearing. The moving party must 1. Give notice to the non-moving party of the TRO unless they can establish ex parte TRO by showing immediate and irreparable harm supported by an affidavit or verified complaint, and certification of the reasons why notice should not be required. 2. Show a likelihood of success on the merits of the underlying claim. 3. Prove that they will suffer irreparable harm before a preliminary injunction can be obtained, and 4. Establish that the balance of hardships favors the plaintiff. It is not appealable. Preliminary injunction. A preliminary injunction is a court order that preserves the status quo until final judgment is entered. The moving party must 1. Give notice and an opportunity for a hearing to the non-moving party. 2. Show a likelihood of success on the merits of the underlying claim. 3. Prove that they will suffer irreparable harm absent the injunction, and 4. Establish that the balance of hardships favors the plaintiff. It is immediately appealable. Injunction bond. A party seeking an injunction may be required to post bond to compensate a wrongfully enjoined party if that party ultimately prevails at trial. Permanent injunction. An injunction is an in personam order issued by a court of equity that requires a party to act or refrain from acting. It is backed by the contempt power. The court must consider the inadequacy of legal remedies, irreparable harm, the balance of hardships, the feasibility of enforcement, and the public interest. Specific performance. Specific performance is an in personam order issued by a court of equity that requires a party to perform their obligation under a contract. It is backed by the contempt power. The court must consider 1. Valid contract with 2. Certain terms and 3. Conditions satisfied. 4. The inadequacy of legal remedies. 5. Mutuality of performance. 6. Feasibility of enforcement. And 7. Lack of defenses including unclean hands and laches. Equitable defenses. Laches. A court of equity will not grant relief to a party who has sat on his rights to the detriment of the defendant. The defendant must show that there was an unreasonable delay resulting in either economic or evidence harm. Unclean hands. A court of equity will not grant relief to a party who acts in bad faith with respect to the subject matter of the suit. Estoppel. A defendant may claim estoppel when the plaintiff induces the defendant to act, and then sues for that very conduct. Rescission. Rescission is an equitable remedy that allows a party to void a contract due to lack of valid consent. Grounds for rescission include fraud, misrepresentation, mistake, duress, or undue influence. Reformation. A court of equity will rewrite a contract that fails to reflect the true intent of the parties, such as when there is a scrivener's error. A contract may also be reformed if there is a unilateral mistake where one party knew of the mistake and failed to correct it. Restitution. Restitution is a remedy to address unjust enrichment. Rather than measuring relief by the plaintiff's loss, the court measures it by the defendant's gain. To obtain restitution, the plaintiff must show that the defendant received a benefit, and that retaining that benefit would be unjust. Restitution does not require wrongdoing on the part of the defendant. Restitution at law. In a suit in assumpsit, courts may create a quasi-contract, which is a fictitious contract under which the defendant owes damages to the plaintiff for breach. 1. Quantum meruit allows recovery for the reasonable value of services rendered. 2. Money had and received permits recovery of money wrongfully retained by the defendant. 3. Goods sold and delivered supports recovery of the fair market value of goods delivered to the defendant. Replevin. Replevin is the return of property, before trial, to the proper holder of title. Ejectment. Ejectment is the return of real property, before trial, to the proper holder of title. Monetary damages may be awarded for the unlawful possession, treated as a breach. Restitution at equity. A court of equity may award restitution in the form of a constructive trust or an equitable lien when legal remedies are inadequate. This typically arises when the defendant is insolvent and judgment-proof, or when the defendant has obtained wrongfully obtained profits. Constructive trust. A constructive trust is an equitable remedy in which the defendant is deemed to hold the property for the benefit of the plaintiff. To qualify, the plaintiff must trace the unjust enrichment to the purchase of property obtained by the defendant. If granted, the plaintiff becomes the owner of the property and shares in the appreciation in value. Equitable lien. An equitable lien secures a specific monetary amount in the defendant's property to the extent of the unjust enrichment. To qualify, the plaintiff must trace the unjust enrichment to either purchase or improvement in property held by the defendant. The equitable lien gives the plaintiff priority creditor status. Tracing issues. When the defendant takes unjust enrichment and places it into an account containing personal funds, the account becomes commingled. In such cases, the plaintiff cannot trace the unjust enrichment to an amount greater than the lowest intermediate balance.